Good afternoon. We are high above the East River as today's parade of sail is just starting to get underway. This is the parade of sail for the Class B tall ships. Generally those ships that are 130 feet or less in length and have traditional rigging for their sails. As we can see, this one ship starting to make its way through the Hell Gate area. This is the first one that we've seen start to enter the area. The rest of the ships are still starting to line up and get information on the northern end of the Eastern River, the area around Hunts Point, North and South Brother Islands. Will take you up to those northern areas again in the East River where all the ships are beginning to line up. This afternoon's event, the first of two major parades of ships happening this weekend with all of the July 4th activities. We have, of course, the Class B tall ships today, and then tomorrow, the Class A tall ships. Many of those ships have been staging in the area just off of Sandy Hook. That parade will get underway tomorrow morning at about 9 o'clock. That will, of course, have flyovers by numerous military aircraft. But again, we are over today's parade of sail, making its way down the East River. Again, these ships still lining up and getting information on the northern end of the East River. We watched as the first ship is starting to make its way through the Hell Gate area where the East River and Harlem River come together. Now, there has been an increased presence with the Coast Guard in all of the waterways around the city for this weekend's events. Numerous Coast Guard ships patrolling the East River as well as the Hudson River and New York Harbor. Over the last few days, we've watched as numerous military vessels have made their way in from all around the world, numerous countries being represented in this weekend's activities. Some 20,000 sailors from at least 20 countries in the city for this weekend's festivities. Again, we are watching now as the parade of sail is just starting to get underway. We are where the East River and Harlem Rivers come together. We can see those two sailing ships starting to make their way, and again, the rest of them still getting in line, getting information in the area off of Hunts Point. We'll just take this in for a few minutes and watch as these ships start to make their way down the East River. And this afternoon's parade of sail is expected to take about 3 hours in total, with the parade scheduled to start at 1 o'clock. We did see the ships starting to line up slightly before 1 o'clock, again making their way down through the area where the East River and Harlem River come together. The first ships in the parade were anticipated to pass by Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. And again, the parade in total expected to take close to 3 hours. Approximately 20 ships partaking in this afternoon's parade. And as we've been mentioning, there are numerous Coast Guard ships patrolling the East River as well as the other waterways around the city for this weekend's activities. Now we have some additional ships beginning to make their way towards the Arcade Triborough Bridge. Some of them are still getting in line in the area off of Hunts Point. And again, this is the Class B parade of sail. Class B tall ships are considered those that are 130 feet or less in length, have traditional rigging for their masts, And as we watch these ships begin to make their way down the East River, eventually they'll be parading by Brooklyn Bridge Park. The first ships were expected to reach that area by about 3 o'clock this afternoon. The ships at the back of the line possibly passing by that area within the following hour. The parade in total expected to last from about 1 until 4 o'clock this afternoon. It did get away pretty much on time. The ships were starting to get information around the North and South Brother Islands just before 1 o'clock, and the ship at the front of the line did start to pass through this area shortly after 1 o'clock. And in addition to today's parade of sail, there will be a much larger parade tomorrow morning. That parade expected to last from about 9 o'clock in the morning until possibly as late as 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Class A Grand Review, many tall ships, much larger than the ones we're seeing today. Those ships have been staging off of Sandy Hook. They will start their parade tomorrow morning. There are numerous military vessels in town from all over the world. Militaries representing numerous countries will be on hand, as well as the United States, to watch tomorrow's parade of sail. We saw earlier in the week several U.S. ships have arrived. The USS Nimitz, Kearsarge, as well as the Arlington, just to name a few that have already arrived in town. We saw some additional ships arriving this morning, aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, as well as missile destroyers, among others. Again, numerous activities ongoing in and around the city for this weekend's July 4th celebrations. And those that live near any of the waterways around the city, Hudson River, East River, will be treated to 2 parades, one today, one tomorrow. Today's Class B parade of sail, and tomorrow's Class A ships, where those larger sailing ships will be making their way up the Hudson River. Today's parade exclusively in the East River, and tomorrow's parade will be taking place in the Hudson River. Watching now as some of the ships start to make their way around past Astoria. We are at the point where the East River and Harlem Rivers come together. We'll widen out for a moment to give viewers familiar with the area perspective of where we are. You can see one of those Coast Guard ships patrolling nearby, with the tall ships making their parade down the East River. Today's parade taking place exclusively in the East River. The ships have been lining up for about the last hour and a half. We saw many of them making their way north on the East River prior to noon, up to the area around Hunts Point, North and South Brother Islands, as well as the areas just off the southern Bronx coastline into the East River. Ships still getting information, some of them still lining up north of the RFK Triborough Bridge. I've now watched several of them pass by that area, making their way through the stretch of water where the East and Harlem Rivers come together, starting to round the bend by Astoria. They'll be traveling southbound on the East River. The lead ships were anticipated to get to Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. This parade started Just about on time, shortly after 1 o'clock, the first ship started making its way down the East River. And as we've been mentioning, there's a large Coast Guard presence, not only for today's events, but tomorrow as well. Numerous Coast Guard vessels in the area helping to patrol the waters to assist with the NYPD. Numerous personal watercraft as well. We've seen a large gathering of boats now begin to take place near the Statue of Liberty. Of course, there are all of the Navy ships from the United States as well as other countries being represented in town for this weekend's festivities. Many of those ships in the harbor as well as the Hudson River, in addition to some of them being docked by the Intrepid as well as the home port in Staten Island. Again, we're watching as some of the Class B tall ships start to make their way down the East River. These two ships at the lead, just passing by Astoria. And if you're just joining us, we have been following this afternoon's Parade of Sail, one of two ship parades taking place this weekend, all related to the July 4th celebrations. Today's parade is the Class B tall ships. Those are ships that are generally shorter than 130 feet in length, have traditional rigging for their sails. As we can see, some of the ships now starting to make their way down the East River. They have been assembling in the area just off of Hunts Point, North and South Brother Islands. Saw them just before 1 o'clock start to get in line, and the first few ships now making their way down the East River. We're at the point just after where the East River and Harlem River come together. The first ships were anticipated to pass by Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. The parade in total expected to take upwards of 3 hours to complete. And we're watching now as some of those ships start to make their way down the East River. And as you can see, we are looking at the lead ship, which is now passing the stretch of the East River between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. That is the FDR Drive, just towards the top of the screen. In total, it was expected that somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 sailors representing numerous countries would be in town for the weekend. We have the Class B tall ships that we're watching today parade down the East River. Tomorrow, a much larger parade of taller ships and longer ships that will be taking place in the harbor as well as the Hudson River. Those ships have been staging off of Sandy Hook since yesterday, and throughout the week, numerous Navy ships from all over the world have been assembling in the harbor as well as the Hudson River. Earlier this morning, we saw the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier make its way underneath the Verrazano Bridge. That is currently in the middle of the harbor, as well as numerous other Navy ships, missile destroyers, aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, Navy ships from around the world. Again, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 visitors on ships visiting for this weekend's activities. Today's parade expected to last until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with the ships at the front of the line reaching Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. And tomorrow's much larger parade will begin at 9 o'clock in the morning and last until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Watching as one of the ships is passing by Gracie Mansion. Looks like numerous crowds along the edge of the water taking in the ships. What a great vantage point for anybody that is in the area of the 80s in Manhattan to get over to the park along the East River. We'll have a great viewing point of any of these ships making their way south along the East River. For anybody wondering, they are going between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan, or at least the first several ships have. So anybody, again, along the east side of Manhattan should have a great viewpoint of the ships as they pass by. Going in for a look. Here we are at 1:30 in the afternoon, and numerous people taking in the views this afternoon of those tall ships making their way down the East River. This all started at about 1 o'clock. Approximately 20 ships involved in this afternoon's parade. And throughout the weekend, there are numerous nations being represented in all the ships involved with the activities going on. Again, today's Parade of Sail, tomorrow's much larger parade, numerous Navy vessels from around the world in town as well. And again, thank you for joining us. We are watching this afternoon's Parade of Sail making its way down the East River. Just to recap today's event, this is the smaller, what is considered to be, or what is called the Class B. Those are ships 130 feet in length or less with traditional rigging for their sails. Making their way down the East River, this parade started about 1 o'clock in the area just north of the RFK Triborough Bridge. All throughout the morning, the ships were making their way up the East River. They started to assemble and get in line in the area just off of Hunts Point, the North and South Brother Islands. We watched as several of those ships went around the islands to eventually get in line and formation to get ready for this afternoon's parade. This is one of 2 parades that are taking place this weekend. Today's parade, again, the Class B tall ships, and tomorrow, the much larger Class A tall ships. Those ships have been assembling off of Sandy Hook. That parade will take place tomorrow beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning and lasting until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Today's parade expected to wrap up sometime around 4 o'clock, with the ships at the front of the line expected to reach Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Again, we're watching as those ships make their way in the stretch of the East River between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. So anybody along the east side of Manhattan should have a great view of the ships as they go by. And for anybody in Long Island City, of course, once the ships get by the south end of Roosevelt Island, they should have a good view as well, both Manhattan and the Queens as well as Brooklyn shorelines once they are south of Roosevelt Island. Again, numerous ships now making their way down the East River. This is the point south of where the Harlem River and the East River come together, that stretch between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. Once again, we're watching this afternoon's parade of sail. The Class B tall ships making their way down the East River, one of two parades for this weekend's 4th of July festivities. This parade started just about 1 o'clock. The ships spent the morning making their way up the East River and eventually getting into line and formation in the area just off of Hunts Point. The first ships getting underway just after 1 o'clock. And now as we're watching, the ships at the front of the line are making their way down the East River between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. As you can see now, some of those ships getting closer to the Manhattan shoreline. So a certain treat for anybody along the east side of Manhattan within viewing distance of the East River. They should have a great view of the ships making their way. Just a few minutes ago, we were looking at the area near Gracie Mansion, and there were numerous crowds that had assembled in that area. The ships at the front, again, supposed to arrive around Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. That was the estimated time of arrival, with the parade itself in total lasting until about 4 o'clock. So about a 3-hour ride for the ships at the back of the line to eventually make their way down to Brooklyn Bridge Park. With all of the weekend's festivities, numerous countries being represented. We saw Navy ships from all around the world arriving throughout the week. As far as the U.S. Navy has sent here, we have seen USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier. We have seen amphibious assault ships, missile destroyers. Again, numerous Navy vessels in town. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 sailors expected to be in town for all of this weekend's activities. And to help and assist with all of this, the U.S. Coast Guard has substantially more vessels in the waterways around the city than we would typically see. East River, Hudson River, as well as New York Harbor. We have seen numerous Coast Guard vessels on hand. Some of those that are officially taking place in the parade and the festivities. The U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard Eagle is on hand. That is a ship that we typically see in town for Fleet Week, which traditionally is around Memorial Day, but of course with the big celebrations for July 4th this year, Fleet Week activities were essentially shifted into this weekend's activities. And again, we're watching as those tall ships are making their way down the East River. The Class B tall ships, 130 feet in length or shorter. they are making their way down the East River, and tomorrow morning that will be the much larger parade with the Class A tall ships, those larger ships which have been gathering near Sandy Hook for the last few days. They will be making their way into New York Harbor tomorrow morning with that parade kicking off at about 9 o'clock. Expected to last until as long as 2 o'clock, and I should mention that in addition to all of the ships which are taking part in the parades or just here to view the parades, there will be numerous military aircraft on hand as well doing a flyover. That flyover will be led by the Navy Blue Angels. It will be taking place sometime around 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That air demonstration expected to last for about an hour. Now, the Blue Angels have been doing their traditional Fleet Week, Memorial Day air show activities around Jones Beach for the last few days, and that will continue through the weekend. But tomorrow they will have the honor of leading that military flyover of the parade of ships tomorrow. Again, that all taking place, the activities in total, from about 9 o'clock in the morning until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. For those of you that are joining us, welcome. And for those of you that haven't been with us for some time now, thank you for staying with us. We're following the parade of sail on the East River. The Class B tall ships, 130 feet or less in length, making their way down the East River. Currently in the stretch between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. These ships spent the morning going up the East River, where they started to assemble just off of Hunts Point in the Bronx. We watched as some of them essentially sailed around the North and South Brother Islands to get in formation, start making their way down the East River. Seems like most of them now have made their way past the Hellgate area, where the Harlem River and the East River come together. And again, we're watching as those ships make their way down the East River. The estimated timeline was that the ships at the front of the parade would reach Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock, and with the parade in total wrapping up sometime around 4 o'clock this afternoon. As we're watching these ships make their way down the East River, we can tell you that tomorrow's parade will be even larger. That will take place in the harbor, as well as the Hudson River, the Class A tall ships, those much larger ships which have been assembling off of Sandy Hook. They will be making their way into the harbor tomorrow morning for that parade starting at about 9 o'clock. Getting back to today's parade, again, the ships making their way through that stretch of water between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. For anybody, of course, on the east side of Manhattan, as these people are along the edge, you'll have a great view of the ships as they make their way south on the East River. For anybody in Long Island City, the ship at the front of the line should be coming into view soon. So anybody Long Island City and from there further along the Brooklyn shoreline should be able to see the ships coming into view fairly soon. The lead ship is just about at the southern end of Roosevelt Island. We'll take you down the East River now to look at that ship at the front of the line. Also worth mentioning that the U.S. Coast Guard has deployed significantly more vessels into the waterways than we would typically see around on a typical day. The East River, Hudson River, as well as the harbor. Numerous Coast Guard vessels around to help patrol the waterways, assist with those parades. And numerous military represented this weekend. We are seeing Navy ships from all over the world in the harbor, as well as the Hudson River. The U.S. Navy has sent the USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier. We have seen amphibious assault ships, as well as missile destroyers, among others, that are in town for all of this weekend's activities. That is the ship at the front of the line. It's getting close to the southern end of Roosevelt Island. So again, anybody in Long Island City, they may be able to see the sails from these ships fairly soon. Expected to be about 20 ships involved in today's parade. Many more tomorrow for the much larger parade, those much larger Class A tall ships, which will be parading through the harbor as well as the Hudson River. But again, today we are looking at the Class B ships, those ships that are 130 feet in length or less. Approximately 20 of them involved in today's parade. It started just about 1 o'clock, making its way down the East River. As you can see in the stretch of water now, most of those ships in between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. So anybody along the east side continuing to get a great view of these ships as they make their way down the East River. U.S. Coast Guard has been patrolling the area, and so far we are unaware of any incidents. So that is certainly good news. There have been a noticeable increase in personal boats in the area over the last couple of days, and of course many people looking to get a look at the tall ships, the Navy ships, as well as the fireworks tomorrow evening. But again, right now, the spotlight on the Parade of Sail making its way down the East River. And again, you can get an idea of some of the crowds that have been assembling along the East River to look at the ships as they go by. And for anybody watching that's looking to scout ahead for an opportunity to watch the ships, as you can see, the lead ship is approaching the area near the United Nations building, so still some time to get over to the east side if you're in Manhattan to get a look at the ships as they go by. There are also ships behind these, approximately 20, taking place in this parade. So there are still some ships coming through the area near the RFK Triborough Bridge. So it'll take some time for all of those ships to make their way down the East River. Again, the ships at the front of the line were estimated to reach Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, with the ships at the back of the line estimated to wrap up sometime around 4 o'clock. Of course, that's all estimated based on the wind and the tides. That'll certainly affect how slow or fast these ships are able to make it down the East River. But again, they are steadily making their way south on the river. Again, if anybody's wondering, for tomorrow's parade, which begins at 9 o'clock, that will be exclusively in the harbor as well as the Hudson River. Today's events solely in the East River, and tomorrow's events will take place in the harbor as well as the Hudson River. tall ships involved in this weekend's activities, as well as the Navy ships from all around the world that have arrived. It was estimated some 20,000 sailors are in town for all of this week's events. Of course, many of these tall ships that we're looking at may not carry anywhere near the amount of personnel that something along the lines of an aircraft carrier can carry, but of course, many types of ships being represented, the tall ships, Navy ships, again, from all around the world. 20,000 sailors will be in town for all of the activities. Again, we're watching now as the first few ships start to make their way past Roosevelt Island, so anybody in Long Island City and points south there along the Brooklyn shoreline on the East River, you will be able to see the ships. The first ships now will be coming into view. Just going to bring you over to the shoreline, Long Island City. For anybody in the area that's looking to find a vantage point, give an idea of where those ships at the front of the line are. Now, today's parade does not have any type of official aircraft flyover associated with it, but tomorrow's parade will. We are receiving reports of numerous aircraft, helicopters, airplanes, again, representing numerous countries for tomorrow's flyover during the parade tomorrow. The Navy Blue Angels will have the honor of leading that military flyover tomorrow. They have been in town for the last few days and will continue through the weekend for their traditional Fleet Week, Memorial Day weekend activities at Jones Beach. Of course, all of those activities shifted this year towards July 4th with a big celebration for America's birthday. We have today's parade, a much larger one tomorrow, and of course tomorrow evening the traditional July 4th fireworks. Okay, thank you. And we are continuing to watch today's parade of sail making its way down the East River. The Class B tall ships, those ships that are 130 feet in length or shorter, making their way down the East River. Today's parade started right around 1 o'clock. We watched throughout the morning as all these ships made their way up the East River to the area off of Hunts Point, as well as the area around the North and South Brother Islands. Watched just before 1 o'clock as the ships started to get in line, get in formation, and shortly after that, the ship that we're watching now at the front of the line started to make its way southbound along the East River. And over the last hour, those ships have been making their way down the East River, passing through the stretch between Roosevelt Island and Manhattan. These two ships at the front are now visible from the area of Long Island City for anybody in Long Island City, and eventually along the Brooklyn shoreline along the East River. You should be able to see those ships, and again, as they continue to make their way further along the East River, those more ships will come into view. You would see the third one now just about to pass the United Nations building. We could see earlier as crowds had assembled along the Manhattan shoreline, all those parks along the East River. People had been assembling to watch the ships as they go by. Today's parade of sail involving these smaller tall ships is just the prelude to tomorrow's larger parade, which will involve those Class A larger tall ships. Those ships have been assembling off of Sandy Hook for the last few days. That parade will kick off tomorrow at about 9 o'clock and last until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, tomorrow's parade taking place in the harbor as well as the Hudson River. Today's parade exclusively in the East River. So again, anybody along the Manhattan shoreline of the East River should get a pretty good view of these ships as they go by, as well as anybody in Long Island City and then into Brooklyn, point south towards Brooklyn Bridge Park. The ships at the front of the line were expected to pass Brooklyn Bridge Park at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, with the ships at the back of the line reaching that area closer to 4 o'clock. We have seen an increased presence by the Coast Guard to patrol the waterways in and around the city with all of the activities going on this weekend. Numerous Coast Guard vessels, more than we would typically see on a typical day, to help patrol the area. And so far, we are unaware of any incidents that they've had to deal with. That is certainly good news for the Coast Guard, as well as the NYPD, who has also been assisting with patrolling the waterways. We have numerous Navy ships in town for this weekend's activities. United States Navy has sent an aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, as well as amphibious assault ships, missile destroyers, among others. And there are navies from around the world being represented. Today's parade itself is represented by numerous countries, not just ships based here in America. There are ships from the Netherlands as well as other countries. Some 20,000 sailors from around the world in town for all of this weekend's activities. And again, we are watching as today's parade of sail makes its way down the East River. Again, if you are along the shoreline of Manhattan or Long Island City, you will get a view of these ships. Thank you for joining us. We will continue to follow this situation, and again, enjoy your weekend activities.